My guest today is Professor Deirdre McCloskey, who is Professor of Economics and History Emerita and Professor of English and Communication at the University of Illinois at Chicago. One of her recent books is Why Liberalism Works, How True Liberal Values Produce a Freer, More Equal, Prosperous World for All. Welcome, Deirdre.
Yes, I'm glad to be there, if only virtually.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. So you sent me a number of different pieces. You have been very productive, it looks like, during the pandemic. Yeah. I know that you're writing a number of books as well. So I want to start with one of the pieces that you sent me, Why You Are Not a Conservative.
Yeah.
You say, what is the difference between libertarians and conservatives? Using our favorite word, it is, of course, our unique belief in liberty, just liberty, and spontaneous ordering in the way that language or art or science is ordered by people having a go within a loose framework of honest rewards.
Yeah.
So you and I have a common, some common time at the University of Chicago. You in a big way, you were a tenured professor there. I was a graduate student. But University of Chicago has a set of ideals or ideas. It seems to impart on everybody that's associated with the school. So what's your thinking here? What exactly do you mean by the difference between libertarians and conservatives?
Well, it's also the difference between what I would just call them real liberals and the left, the socialists, and it is that we want people to be adults. We want them to be grown up. Now that doesn't mean we don't help them when they're in trouble and so on, but I would almost call what I believe and John Stuart Mill believed and Adam Smith believed adultism. That is the idea that people shouldn't be children of the state or of anyone else. And conservatives, on the contrary, like hierarchy. They like there to be a priest who takes care of his flock, and they like there to be a king who takes care of his subjects. And the same is true at the other end of the conventional spectrum. If the old joke is, I'm from the state and I'm here to help you. And it always inevitably involves coercion. And adults should be adults, not slaves or children.
Yeah, so I'm very sympathetic to that idea, Deirdre. It's probably we agree on most of the things, so I'm looking for something that I can disagree with you. So I mean, libertarianism has gone through multiple definitional changes, it seems to me. Yeah. And people, I think, have different definitions for it even now. It's not really commonly understood definition or phenomenon, I think. So how do you really define libertarianism?
Well, again, I don't like the word libertarian, which was turned to this use we're talking about only about half a century ago, or maybe 70 years ago. And the earlier word was simply liberal. And that was an 18th century coinage. Liberalism was first used in a publication by David Hume in Scotland. And so it's this theory of autonomy in community. It's often claimed by both conservatives and socialists that we liberals are not interested in being nice to people and not interested in helping other people and being in community with them. And on the contrary, that's our main focus. The key thing is dignity and respect. And the trouble is that if you're a socialist central planner or a Raj, a boss of everyone from the right, then you're bossing people around, and that we don't like. Helping people is one thing, bossing them around is another.
Yeah, the distinction between wanting hierarchy and, let's say, egalitarianism, for lack of a better term. I wrote a book in 2009, Deirdre. It's called Flexibility, in which I argued there are no reasons for companies to exist. Large companies are, very much organized like pyramids with very well defined hierarchies.
Yeah.
And it all happened in Industrial Revolution because of high transaction costs. In a modern world where the transaction costs are nearly zero, there is really no need for hierarchical systems to produce things. But I was wrong in 2009. I continue to be wrong because large companies exist. In fact, I think 6 companies command 40% of S&P 500's market cap today.
Yeah.
We have seen things go in the other direction. So how do you explain that?
Well, it sort of depends what you mean by a company. Google is not a producer of anything. It's doing that middleman job of transactions cost that you're talking about. Walmart is the same way. So is Amazon. So these great big companies, they say, oh, Amazon is a monopoly. No, it's not. It's just a communication means between consumers and the companies that make the goods and services. So I think that I think you were right that the old reason to have hierarchy, like an army, where the general sends out an order and everyone turns left or right or goes ahead, is less and less necessary in the modern world. And yet, contrary to that, the state in the modern world, which is the hierarchy of hierarchies, is getting bigger. And that I do find somewhat paradoxical and certainly irritating. I have a cousin. Interestingly, she works for the CIA. And we don't know what Annie does, but we think she probably is in charge of all the spies in Europe. But we don't know that. But anyway, I was talking to her. She's very intelligent. She's a very nice person. And she said what people often say, the more complicated an economy becomes, the more it needs to be regulated. The more we need, she said, bigger and bigger states to regulate the economy. And I said, no, Annie, it's the other way around. The more complicated the economy becomes, the less it should be regulated, or the more impossible becomes the job. Look, is it a good idea to have central planning of the Tamil language or the English language or the Chinese language? Obviously not. Is it a good idea to have central planning of rock music? So, some official tells you what bands you're allowed to see. Obviously not. And the point that we, Adam Smith liberals, make is that that's true of the economy too. It's probably a poor idea and Adam Smith was eloquent on this. He spoke of the arrogance of the expert planner. He said these guys are nuts. He didn't quite put it that way. That to think that they can plan, regulate in detail the economy. So I think think your hypothesis is actually correct. Because of this funny middleman organizations that have gotten so big, it looks like it's contradicted, but it's not.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. So what grew is intermediation.
Yeah.
Investment banking is another example. Google
Yes.
search is an example, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Walmart's product intermediation is a good example. So really what is growing is intermediation.
That's right.
Not production, right?
Yeah. Yes, and of course it's a much cheaper kind of intermediation, and that's why it grows. It's not because there's some conspiracy of the monopolists to take over the world. The big monopolists who are taking over the world are the politicians. It's the government that's taking over the world, not Amazon or something. Amazon is a cheaper way to get goods. And how do I know that? Because I choose it all the time. I have, in my neighborhood, in fact, downstairs, practically in my building, is a lovely independent bookstore. And I know the owner, she's a wonderful person, and I would like to buy all my books through her. But sitting here in my easy chair and clicking on Amazon is a lot quicker and even cheaper. So I do it. So the transaction cost, even of just going downstairs and ordering the book through her, is higher than the transactions costs of making a click on my computer. And so it is with all these. In investment banking is a cheaper way of directing the investment of the world. If you didn't have investment banks, individual rich people would be choosing to invest in this company or that company. Instead, the investment banker brings her expertise to the table, and you can and shows the economy where to go.
Yeah, the only thing I would differ there, Deirdre, is that I don't know if investment bankers have a lot of expertise.
Well, they no, they don't. But the individual millionaire has even less, I think, is the point. So as Ronald Coase pointed out in the 1930s, the great economist Ronald Coase, it's a matter of the comparative cost. The question is, do you do it yourself? Does the automobile company make its own steel? I suppose it could, but it's probably smarter to outsource the making of the steel for its cars and then buy it from them. And it's that choice that Coase talked about, the choice between doing it yourself and hiring someone else to do it. And although they're, the steel company may not be perfect at making steel, but it's better than General Motors or someone or Tata or something making its own steel for automobiles.
Yeah, I understand that. So competitive advantage is sort of clear. But going back to the intermediation, though, going back to investment banking, for example, yeah. it presumes that the intermediation cannot happen without the investment banker. So, for instance, there are a lot of services, on internet, go fund it, and actually when Google thought of going IPO, they thought of actually putting it out on the internet.
Sure.
In small pieces. And they didn't have the guts to do it ultimately. They had to go find an investment banker. But I think there is a sort of a premise that is not truly validated in the modern world, where there is an inefficiency in funding online that investment bankers somehow mediate.
Well, I would make the prediction, and so do you make the prediction, it seems, that the internet will substitute for investment banks, just as the investment banks substituted for the individual, high wealth individual making her decision by herself. That was maybe that very old way of doing it was not so bad, but it was better to have a handsome young man in a nice suit making that decision. The handsome young man, which in fact is happening in stock trading in a big way, in the sheer secondhand trading of stock, that then is overcome by this change in technology. So I expect that'll happen. In fact, if we're doing investment advice, invest in such companies. Although, if I was so smart, I'd be rich.
No, I mean, as you know, the academic prescription for 50 years has been just have a portfolio allocation that's on the efficient frontier.
Yeah.
Don't pick stocks and bonds of specific companies. But it's $1 trillion industry. Almost everybody out there knows which stock is going to go up and which stock is going to go down, it seems. And a lot of money.
I once wrote a book in 1990 called If You're So Smart, which is the joke. I called it the American question. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And it's a very good question to ask about anyone who claims to know the future of fashion, the future of music, the future of mathematics, the future of anything human. Now, the future of geology or the weather, even though there are limits on that, that's very plausible because the mountains and the clouds are not listening. But with humans, they're listening. And if you say, oh, well, there's a January effect, stocks go up in January. Well, if that's true, anyone who hears it can make a fortune. So there has to be something wrong with that kind of second guessing of the human world.
Yeah, this is slightly off track, Deirdre, but I want to get your perspective on this. So I grew up in a southern state in India. This is a state that elected a Marxist government to power right after independence.
Yeah. You mean Kerala?
Kerala, yeah. So, I grew up. There is a sense of egalitarianism in that system.
Yeah.
There were a lot of different religions, but egalitarianism was sort of a fundamental construct that people gravitate toward. Then I came to Northwestern, and after University of Chicago, my views changed.
Yeah.
But of late, I look at large democracies, large free market capital systems, and I find no egalitarianism of any sort.
Well, I don't actually agree with that. Look, there's bad inequality, and that comes from stealing, or it comes from stupid behavior by government. In 1950, 5% of Americans had to have state licenses for their work. Now it's almost 30%. Now that's a really bad idea, and it's going to make people poorer, and it's going to create inequalities because the people who get the licenses often get them for reasons of favoritism and so on. So that's bad inequality, and I'm like my friends on the left. I'm against it. But there's good inequality. I'm a cricket fan, and if some guy knows how to bat very well, I have up on my computer here. I can show it to you. 97.97. 97.97. Do you know what that is?
No.
That was Donald Bradman's.
Oh, test. Yeah. Right, yeah.
99.97. He was out for a duck in his last innings.
Right.
And so it wasn't over 100. So look, I think Donald Bradman deserved every, Australian dollar he got. and someone sings better than someone else, someone knows brain surgery better than someone else. In order to get people to do that, you have to pay them more. And in any case, what the high payment for, I don't know, Donald Bradman or someone or a brain surgeon does is it signals to the economy, make more of this. If you can figure out to make your feet as fast as Donald Bradman's, do it. If you have a new way of teaching people to be brain surgeons, do it. So that's good. And then, of course, the speaking of Amazon, Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world because he had a very good idea. And most of the gain, the social gain from his good idea goes to you and me, not to him. Bill Nordhaus has done a calculation that since the Second World War in the United States, only 2% of the social gain of innovation has gone to the inventors or the entrepreneurs. Now, 2% of Walmart makes the children of Walton, James Walton, Jim Walton, very, very rich. If you add them all together, they're more than Bezos. But it makes us rich too. I just wrote a book with Art Carden, a kind of popular summary of some more scholarly books of mine called, here's what it's called, Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich. Leave me alone and I'll make you rich.
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully agree with that, Deirdre. So the only thing I would say is that the rules have to be the same for everybody.
They should, and that's your word, in your very accurate and good word, egalitarianism. The key to real liberalism, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, and even Milton Friedman and me, is equality. If there's not equality, if you blockade entry to, I don't know, retailing, then Amazon can't be invented. And indeed, Jeff Bezos just goes on being rich. What's happened over and over and over again in economic history is that someone gets a bright idea. He's made rich by that idea, like the invention of department stores in France and Britain and the United States in the late 19th century. The standard department store was a very clever invention, clever marketing invention. And many fortunes, local fortunes, were made in all these countries from department stores. But, it's easy to imitate. And so people rushed in, and then the consumers get the benefit because you can't charge a big price or you can't get large profits if everyone's coming in. It's the obstacles, the inegalitarian obstacles. You remember what I said about occupational licenses. I'm usually the only person in the room who could be an apprentice electrician in the state of Michigan in the United States. Now, why is that? Now, I'm 79 years old, so I'm not likely to do that. But I'm the only, you can't, I can. And the reason is that the only way you get into the union of electricians in Michigan is to have a grandfather, an uncle, and a cousin, all of whom were union electricians. And that creates inequality. Right. If anyone can be an electrician who wants to be, or, goes and learns, then electricians are not expensive. I just spent to have a pipe replaced. I gave a plumber in Chicago $400. He was in my house for about half an hour.
Yeah, so I want to ask you one more question on this, and we'll go to other pieces. So where do you stand on initial conditions. What I mean is that we recently lost a self-proclaimed most intelligent president who said that his dad,
stable genius.
yeah, stable genius. His dad gave him only a few $1,000,000, and look what he has accomplished.
400.
Which is so. I'm not big on taxing anything, but I think setting initial conditions similar to everybody running the race. No?
No, here's why. The key to real freedom in a country is equality of permission. It's permission that you need. Equality of opportunity is impossible. And the reason is that it depends on who your parents are. And I was very clever in choosing my parents, and I deserve tremendous credit for it. My father was a professor at Harvard University. My mother was an opera singer. Okay, now look, come on. Whereas my father made a very poor choice in choosing his parents. He's the one who became the Harvard professor. His father worked on the railway, and his mother was a housewife. That's bad choice. You see what I mean? So to make people equal, you would have to go to kind of like the Constitution of Sparta in ancient Greece, where you take the children away from their parents and put them in a common schooling from the time they're 3 or 4 years old. And very few people really want that when they think about it. We want our own children. We love our own children. We want to help them as much as we can, whether we're poor or rich. And sometimes a rich person like Donald Trump has very bad parents, which he did. He had terrible, terrible parents, and it made him crazy. And sometimes poor people like Andrew Carnegie, our great entrepreneur, have very good parents who instill, or actually an excellent case is Michelle Obama, Obama's wife. Her father was a government employee. Her mother, I believe, was a housewife, but they instilled this wonderful work ethic. So it's, I want to help poor people mainly. That's my main purpose in becoming an economist. And the best way to help poor people is equality of permission. If they want to buy from India or Germany, they should be allowed to. If they want to enter an occupation, there should be private licenses, not state licenses, that assure quality. That's all.
Yeah, so it's not economic initial conditions. It is really equality in the choice set.
And it's not even the choice set. Look, how many ways can we be equal? If all we're interested in is income equality, that's a very partial understanding. There are some women who are more beautiful than I am. Well, let's see, how to make that equal? I know. We'll chop off the nose of all the other women. And I'll be the most beautiful person in the world. I mean, that's crazy. Look, we have gifts. We all have gifts. Some of us have more gifts than others. I admit that. There's absolute advantage as well as comparative advantage. But there are lots of people smarter than me. You know your language. I forget what language they speak in Kerala.
It's called Malayalam.
Okay, you know that. You know English. You probably know French or something. Okay,
no, I was really bad in languages, Deirdre. So.
Okay, but I'm worse. I guarantee you I'm worse because you speak English very well. You have at least 2 languages. I have 1. How to make us equal? I got it. We'll pound nails into your head until you're as stupid as I am. Equality isn't, there are so many dimensions of humans that it's really silly. Some people are good at, I don't know, Indian traditional music or cricket or cooking or something. And some people aren't. And then we can trade. That's the big thing. If the permissions are there, if we're permitted to do it, then we all get better off.
Permissions and property rights and all the stuff that we talk about, the system is consistent and equal for everyone, right?
But it's mainly the equality that's the point. Look, there is a calculation that economists have made about what would happen to world average income if there was perfectly free migration. I'm in favor of it. It's not going to happen, I admit, but I'm in favor of it. If people wanted to move from Kerala to England or from England to Australia or wherever, they'd be allowed to. That's actually how it was over 100 years ago. Essentially, there was free migration in the 19th century, except the transport costs were very high. Now they're very low. But anyway, it turns out that income would double. World income would double if we allowed people to move freely. And, I'm in favor of doubling income.
It's, I sometimes think about countries, we have 200 of them.
Yeah.
It's sort of a segmentation scheme we put in place.
That's an excellent way of expressing it.
And as you say, if that segmentation scheme doesn't exist, the economies will become more efficient, and talent will go to where talent can capture the highest premium.
Of course, the real equality is equality in having a go, as the British say, in invention, because it's not mainly efficiency in the economist sense or even investment in the banker sense that's made us rich, although they're very nice. What's made us really rich is new ideas, reinforced concrete, the personal computer, the steel, even sailing ship, the steam engine, antibiotics, the modern university. All these are very, very good ideas, and those are what made us rich. And permission to do them is hard to get because the traditional universities are made worse off if there's a new model for universities. And the horse sellers are made worse off if the automobile is invented. So there's always a vested interest in not having innovation. And what's remarkable about the modern world since around 1800 is that innovation enormously increased. I mean, humans have always innovated. India practically invented cotton cloth, although actually there was cotton cloth in the New World before Columbus. But Indian cloth was tremendously good. So that was but they invented too slowly. After 1800, everything got invented, and that depended on permission.
Yeah, so in the modern world, Deirdre, again, we're going a little bit of a tangent, but I want to get your perspective on this. There are two types of innovations. So I think about engineering and medical innovation.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for a company in Nigeria to come up with quantum computers because it takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of investment, right? So it sort of segregates people who can do those types of innovations. But I've been puzzled by, sort of theoretical advancements, which I call, sort of paper and pencil advancement. which I don't see happening that much in countries which you would imagine, a lot of mathematics background and physics and all of that, but we haven't really seen paper and pencil innovation going on there too. So what is holding many of these countries back, you think?
Well, I agree with your word segregation applied to the movement of people and goods. But I don't agree with it when you say that, well, Nigeria hasn't got the academic background to do quantum computing. So that's
not academic, but resources,
yeah.
to make a quantum computer work. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not so sure that investment is the key to all this. But okay, let's set that aside. Why aren't there more paper and pencil innovations? Well, in some ways there are. The examples I have to give, let me see. Well, an easy paper and pencil example from history is mathematics, algebra. Now, the word is Arabic, and it was the original idea was Arabic. It means the breaking apart. It's like the Greek word analysis, which also means breaking apart. Algebra is a paper and pencil innovation, by which you mean it's inexpensive. But so is Amazon. Amazon, they have to have warehouses, but we have warehouse technology. We know that already. An excellent example of a sheer idea. What you're asking is, where are the sheer idea inventions that don't involve massive amounts of capital? And an odd one is the invention in Germany in the 1920s of divided highways, divided limited access highways, the modern superhighway or Autobahn. And that was just someone's idea. An even more spectacular example is containerization. Got to build the containers and the ships to carry them. But the idea is just someone said, gee, a man named Malcolm McLean said, gee, let's put corrugated steel boxes on top of each other and put them on ships and send them to India. So I think there are still paper and pencil ideas that are coming up.
I was thinking more sort of theoretical advancement.
Well, I have something to say about that if you want.
Sure.
I'm the answer lady. I have, if you want advice about your love life, I can give you that, and so on. But here's what's going to happen in the next century. Those theoretical improvements are going to happen in Africa. Now, why is that? They're not going to happen in India or China or in Europe or the United States. They're going to happen in Africa. What a crazy thing to say. Look at the state of Africa, poorest continent in the world. What a mess. Why Africa? Well, everyone here, every Homo sapiens, you and me, come from Africa. Your people came out of Africa, 40,000 years ago, 70,000, 30,000, and turned right. My ancestors came out, 70, 30,000 years ago and turned left. That's the only difference between you and me. We're all Africans. That means I'm not making some strange racist point here. That means that there's much more genetic variability in Africa than there is anywhere else. And that's simply a fact. That's not some crazy madness. It's known to be. It's called the founder effect. And I could go into it, but anyway, it's the founder effect. This means that when Africa develops, as it will, and they stop killing each other, as both Europeans and Indians were doing in a big way before the 19th century, when they stopped all these wars and tyrants and poverty. The smartest people in the world are going to be Africans, black Africans, sub-Saharan Africans. Because the extreme tail of all the distributions of athletic ability, musical ability, scientific ability are going to be people with black skins. So prepare for it. In a century, you and I will be obsolete, and black people will take over these pencil and paper innovations.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side, Deirdre, if you look 100 years into the future, everybody's going to look exactly the same, some sort of Chinese, brownish, blackish, whitish combination.
That's going to take a lot of work, a certain kind of work, speaking of love life.
Yes. So I want to go into another piece. I have to say, I haven't really studied a lot about this. So you say Wokesters wake. What's special about the modern world is not exploitation. The woke are dead asleep, and capitalism has nothing to do with the modern world, you say.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I am on board. So what do you mean?
Well, I call the system that we've developed in the last couple of centuries in India and the United States and all over the place, I call it Innovism, because capitalism is a very silly word, and it's misled people. People think, well, it must be that then capital accumulation is the heart of the modern world, and it's not. It's those pencil and paper ideas, and then their application, whether or not they require lots of capital. In Germany, they were going to build roads anyway, and to make them divided, limited access highways so that cars could go very, very fast without crashing into each other was a very simple and good idea. So the better word for the modern world is Innovism. So that's why I say that the woke and lots of other people who insist on calling it capitalism are so misled. They're certainly asleep. Their economic history is bad. Their analysis of the modern economy and society is bad. Although in that article, this was an article in the conservative magazine, National Review of the United States, and I'm not a conservative. I'm a liberal, and I was saying to them, look, just because the woke are stupid doesn't mean putting a minus sign in front of wokeness is going to make you smart. You're saying, oh no, there's no racism in the United States. Well, come on. That's like saying, there's no caste prejudice in India. I mean, give me a break. Of course there's caste prejudice in India. You're working on it, that's good. But, come on, you can't just deny that the United States has racism.
Yeah, so, sometimes I think the younger crowd, in some sense, gets excited and starts to look at things differently.
Yeah.
But there are foundational issues that have been there for a long time.
I know.
In some sense, nothing has changed, right?
It's very hard. It's a task that you and I and the other grown-ups in the room need to work on. You remember how it was when you were young. I do too. These older people were stupid, and we knew how to do it. I was a socialist then, and they were so stupid, those older people. And here's the problem. Increasingly, young people, if they're middle class, grow up without any understanding of the economy. because they've not had to work. If they come from a farm, they know work. And explaining economics to them is a lot easier than explaining it to the son of a college professor such as I was. You know, I was a son, alas, not a daughter. Okay. And every generation is going to experience that, and it's going to get worse and worse. Here's what's bad about it. Families are socialist economies, and they should be. Neither your mother nor I made us go out to work when we were 5 years old in order to pay for lunch. She just gave it to us and made us eat it, by the way. And that's how it should be. There should be an authoritarian, top-down, mama and papa run the little economy of the family for the benefit of the children. But this idea that families are just sharing, which is true, doesn't apply to what Hayek, the great economist, called the Great Society. If you just start sharing with everyone in your neighborhood, no one will go to work. Everyone will free ride off everyone else. St. Paul, our great saint of Christianity, said once, he who does not work should not eat. Very firm about this. And the reason was that people were living off each other. And the problem with modern politics is that people think, well, I'm in a national family. I mean, you're having a big debate in India about the farmers. And the farmers shouldn't be subsidized by the rest of the economy. That's not smart. That's not how to run an economy. But if the farmers desire to be treated like children, because after all, we're in a big family, you're going to have a very inefficient economy and a very uninnovative economy too, which is not natural for India. India is an extremely creative country. All parts of it are. And it has this wonderfully, here, mark my words. In 20 years, maybe 30, income per head in India is going to be higher than it is in China.
We should come back to that, but I want to push on this family unit, socialistic family unit you talked about.
Yeah.
Let me push on this a little bit. So it used to be that parents knew better than children.
Yeah.
It may not be the case in the future, right? We are sort of an exponentially increasing knowledge curve.
Yeah,
it is quite possible that parents don't know what the right thing might be for the kids.
Well, they often don't. I mean, look, to take a look at arranged marriage, which is not a minor thing in India, in certain groups. And there's a case to be made for arranged marriage, precisely in a situation where it's very hard to communicate, where there's no telephone or no computers, or there's no way of doing it on your own, where for various reasons, transportation cost is very high. So
high transaction costs.
Well, if you want a husband, it's hard to find someone outside your village, and every boy in your village is a jerk. You know, what do you do? You end up marrying a jerk. So then there's a case for the matchmaker and all that kind of stuff. Look, in Ireland, that's what they did. In the Ireland of my ancestors, they had arranged marriages all the time. And so too in India. Okay. And then you're saying, well, with improved transportation costs, go back to our transaction cost argument discussion earlier. All right, then the kids make a better decision. But for little kids, and that's for teenagers. For little kids, it's obvious that you've got to have a mama and a papa, preferably both. And then you got to have aunties, and you got to have uncles, and you got to have a whole family to help these little kids, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a psychological development of a human being, right? So the first few years are so critical.
Absolutely, and that needs this socialist. I call it socialist, but because that's what it is. It's an authoritarian, top-down, centrally planned little family. Now, anyone who's ever been a parent or been in a family, and we all have, knows that it sometimes doesn't work out very well. Sometimes it's a bad family, or sometimes even the most wonderful parents make mistakes. But still, it's necessary. You got to have something like it. In fact, if you go the Spartan route, you simply substitute the state for the mother and father, but it's the same thing. The state then is raising children. Okay, because you've got to raise children, and that's a socialist. And it's very similar to your initial question about the existence of firms. As this character Ronald Coase back in the 30s said, the central direction for some things might be the best way to do it.
Yeah, the other thing I want to ask you is sort of the prescriptive aspects of education, which is a related question. So, as you know, I don't know if it's Norway or Finland, I think it's Finland, who recently sort of redesigned their education system, basically saying they're not going to have, physics 101, chemistry 102 type thing anymore. It is up to the student to design what he or she wants to learn, which I'm very attracted to. I think in the US, we are sort of losing it. I sometimes believe that if you're in engineering school, is there a lot of value in learning Newtonian mechanics? I would argue not really, because we can teach computers Newtonian mechanics pretty well.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So why waste your time?
I completely understand you. I belong to a club in Chicago that was founded by architects and about 100 years ago. And they tell me that young architects do not need to draw anymore. They don't need to learn to draw. So they have the corner of the room. In the old days, they'd draw a picture of it, and they'd have to be good at drawing.
Yeah.
Now they don't need to, because they have these computer-assisted things that if they do it and they then look at it with quotation marks around it, inverted commas, and there's a hole because they didn't give the right dimensions, they can just change the numbers and get the corner of the room to be correct. So, I mean, that's happening. I completely agree with you that the future of mathematics is, for engineering purposes, is simulation, not what we call in mathematics analytic solutions. I think a certain amount of talk of analytic solutions is probably desirable in education somewhere, but it doesn't. And the same thing holds for computers. In computer science courses these days in universities, there are courses in theorems about computers, and they're unnecessary. Any moderately complicated computer program is too complicated for you to know whether it's free of bugs by theorem. You got to try it out. And then you notice, whoops, wait a second, it's doing it wrong here. Then you fix it. And then you add another complication and another until, look, I don't know, Microsoft Word is such a complicated program that the theorems are completely irrelevant. And so, yes, I agree. I think in science generally, in quantitative sciences, simulation is going to take over.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Humans are really bad They have been bad in Industrial Revolution to put nuts and bolts into an automobile. It's repeating. They make a lot of mistakes. We get bad automobiles.
Yes,
Same
right.
thing is happening now in software, programming.
Yeah,
Humans are pretty bad at writing programs because they make a lot of mistakes.
yeah.
You can teach computers to write programs.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not, hey, I don't know, but it sounds to me like AI is the way to go. So you have computers making computer programs, as long as they don't take over.
So I want to go into another paper you have. The economic possibilities for our grandchildren are immense, you say.
Yeah,
You say you hear it said daily that things used to be great, a golden age, but then sadly we have lost our way.
yeah.
Things have never been this bad. So you're taking a counter argument here. Pessimism is ill-considered, even silly, even dangerous, you say.
Yeah.
To the contrary, in the present day, even with COVID, it's the best of times ever, and almost
Yes,
everywhere.
that's true.
So make your case there, and I might have some issues with this. So let's see if we can debate it. Yeah.
Here's one way to look. Here's one way to think about it. The World Bank and the IMF and other wise folk, they reckon that real income per head in the world, which means how much goods and services you can buy and make, is increasing every year, roughly about 2% a year. 2% a year. Some places like India, it's much higher. Some places it's lower, but we hope it's going to start getting better at those places. In Europe and the United States, it's generally below 2%. But okay, that's the rough world average. Now that doesn't sound like much, 2% a year. But compound interest is pretty amazing. It means that, now hear this, by the end of the century, income per head in the world for the average person in the world will be 4 times what it is now. It will have doubled. No, 4 times. No, 8 times more than it is now. It will have doubled 3 times.
Yeah.
And that means that the average person in the world will be earning much more by the year 3000 than, I don't know, Switzerland earns now. So we face an incredibly enriched future if we don't mess it up.
That's a big if, yeah.
That's right, because we've been very good at messing it up. In August 1914, the Europeans started a violent quarrel with each other, which basically didn't end until November 1989. It's the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's a really stupid thing to do, and we want to avoid that. We also want to avoid policy craziness, policy wars, policy mistakes, like attacking inequality in a way that reduces that 2% to 1%. 1% means that by the end of the century, income per head will be only, now hear this, against 8, it'll be 1.5 times more than it is now. It'll be, no, wait, that's not right. It'll be 150% of what it is now instead of 800%. 800% solves a lot of social problems.
Yeah. Income growth solves a lot of problems. I had your colleague from University of Chicago, Ken Pomerantz, on recently.
Yeah.
And one of the insights I got from that conversation is that sometimes when we look at aggregate metrics per capita GDP for a country like China or India or even the US or OECD in general, we miss a lot of the details.
Well, Ken, he's been saying that for about 40 years. He's a man of the left, Pomerantz is, and he's a wonderful man, and he's an excellent historian. He's not a very good economist. And look, average income 8 times more than it is now. There are very few people there are very few boats that aren't going to be raised. A long time ago, Ken did with a colleague at Irvine, the University of California at Irvine, where he was before. They did a very good book of essays that they had been contributing to a newspaper, an economic newspaper in East Asia for a long time. And every chapter in that book is about the bad side of economic growth. Every single chapter. So one of their stories, which was correct, carefully done, showed that people in Central America were exploited to raise twine from some plant that was used to bale wheat and make bales of wheat in Kansas, in the United States. So as the wheat industry expanded, these people were exploited in Latin America. But they weren't. The problems with this argument are immense. They weren't exploited because of the wheat. They were exploited because they were exploited. They were in a bad position, and the bosses took advantage of it. It happened to be about the wheat twine. But what Ken never does, never in his entire scholarly output, which is considerable, does he admit that modern economic growth has increased income in the world by a factor of 3,000% since 1800. What's the story about the last 2 centuries? It's not about the twine makers in Central America. It's about, even in Central America, I was just in Guatemala at a conference for a week. Even in Guatemala, which has, his income per head is half the world average, it's still much better off than it was in 1800, and Ken won't admit it. See, he's a historian, not an economist. He's not a quantitative person. So you talk about averages, how about the people who are below average? Well, I'm telling you that the people below average, your ancestors and mine, my Irish ancestors, your Indian ancestors, were unspeakably poor. And now look at us.
The one thing I worry about, I just want to get a perspective on this. So when we look at economic growth, per capita GDP and so on, are we really internalizing all the costs in that equation? I mean, we seem to have, I don't have all the data, but we seem to have some sort of a runaway greenhouse thing going on, effect, right?
I'm worried about the greenhouse effect. I'm worried about global warming, and I completely believe that it's caused by humans and about carbon emission, and by the way about methane emission, which is much worse, much more dangerous. I mean, there is methane because of the warming coming out of the permafrost in Siberia and northern Canada. This is really dangerous. We got to stop it. So I'm all for it. There's a new technology in Iceland which uses the thermal power of a place that has volcanoes to capture carbon dioxide from the air and turn it into stone at what's now a high price, but can be made low. But anyway, so I think the engineers and engineers ought to get to work on it. I think we ought to have a carbon price to give them an incentive to do it. I think they'll have an incentive anyway, because I think carbon fuels will get gradually more expensive. And actually, the big thing that would save us all is the one thing that we won't do, which is atomic energy. France gets 90% of its energy from atomic energy, clean atomic energy. Germany, which claims to be green, keeps using coal because it's afraid of atomic energy. I mean, this is crazy. But okay, I'm not saying that that's the only solution, but it's one solution. But that's not the way you get those solutions is to have economic growth. The way you fail to get them, the way you go on using cow poop as fuel, which is extremely dangerous. It's very bad for the health of people. It's got lots of carbon in it, for sure. Is for India to get richer. The way for China to be able to afford more atomic energy is for China to get rich. And so it's not saying, oh, well, there's an environmental problem. It's not a way of saying, well, then I guess we got to stop economic growth. If you stop economic growth, you'll have both. You'll be poor and you'll be dead.
And you won't have enough oxygen to breathe. So it's going to be a bad death. So I want to go into another piece you have, prudence over sustainability. It's very connected with what you're talking about. So you say here sustainability is an increasingly popular term.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a poor basis for sound public policy. And this is what we've been sort of discussing. Yeah. You say it conveys a biologist's view of economy without any of the prudence.
That's right.
Economists favor. So
well, sustainability has all kinds of problems. For one thing, to do one thing, which is sustain things in aid of future generations. People always say that. Oh, I want my grandchildren to be better off. Your grandchildren are going to be richer, dear. Your grandchildren in India are going to be, your grandchildren are going to be 2 times better off than you are, maybe 3 times. What are you transferring income from you to your grandchildren for, or your great-grandchildren, or your great-great-grandchildren? It's to be obsessed with the future as though there was no sense in spending the resources we have now in order to achieve a rich future is contrary to common sense, because it's to transfer from poor people, that's people now, to rich people in the future. And that doesn't make any sense from an ethical point of view. From an engineering and economic point of view, isn't it obvious that having more Indian engineers, let's say, using up oil resources to get more engineers now, just take that case, will result in a better future when the engineers think up some alternative to oil. So here's a shocking way of saying what I'm saying. We should give up all the oil now. We should just burn it up. There's no point in saving it. Saving it for who? For these rich people in the future? That's nuts. Burn the oil to get rich, to give people the economic opportunity to go to secondary school and to higher education. And then you'll have the kind of sophisticated entrepreneurial society that can fix the problem of not having the oil anymore. Now, look, I don't think we should. I think we should be stewards of nature. I'm a Christian. I'm an Anglican, and I believe in stewardship, as many faiths do. So I don't mean burn down the Amazonian forest tomorrow. Wouldn't that be fun? We can watch it from space. No, I think there are rational ways of using the forest, but to make it completely sustainable is silly. We look. It actually is the case that there are now more, what's the word for them? More nature preserves, vast areas in the world than there were 20 years ago. Off the coast of Western Africa, there are large parts of the ocean which are nature preserves. I was just looking at a show on TV about it. That's what a rich country, a rich world can do. A poor world, the world of our ancestors, come on, preserving fish was a crazy thing to do. You use up the fish, you over-harvest the fish because you've got to eat. And that's what I mean. Prudent, a prudent attitude towards nature is much better than let's preserve everything and have zero economic growth.
Yeah, the only thing I wonder about, going back to what you were saying before, I don't know if innovation is highly correlated with education. In fact, I will almost go the other direction. I think innovation is sort of a negatively correlated with education. So are we going to be better off having more engineers and more doctors in the future?
We are going to, with having more engineers and doctors is not the problem. Having more arts graduates, maybe. And that doesn't mean we should close off the arts. I'm an professor of English, among other things. And I value it very much because it enriches human life, even if it's not economically enriching. And I agree with you. I think that what's most important is entrepreneurial liberty. And we don't need, I've taught in South Africa for a small amount, but I love South Africa. But what the South Africans say is, well, we've got to have a high minimum wage, which the Congress of South African Trade Unions wants. And then, of course, we get enormous unemployment, 50% unemployment.
Wow.
How to solve that? Well, educate the people so that they're worth the minimum wage, right? Make them read better, have more math, and be engineers. Then they'll be worth the minimum wage. That is a terrible way to do it. What you should do is let people start businesses, which is very hard to do in South Africa. Make them free. Then they'll educate themselves for whatever they want to do once they're enriched. So you're right. In fact, education can often be very conservative, very traditionalist. In fact, it was conventionally. I mean, the way to get educated in India in the old days was to learn Sanskrit. Now, I'm a big fan of Das, Gurcharan Das, who has a wonderful book called How to Be Good, based on the Mahabharata in Hindu in the Hindu epics. And he makes a very good case that that epic is an education in ethics. So I'm all for it. But a lot of education in ethics, as for example, Confucianism in China, is very conservative. It says, obey the emperor, obey your father, obey your older brother, obey your husband. It's all about obedience.
It's hierarchy.
It's hierarchical, as of course Hindu practice is. But in any case, the church in Europe was no great progressive force. Although some people perversely have argued that. I don't know what they're talking about. It's insane. But that is all the Western economic growth came out of Christianity. That is truly nuts. These are people who haven't looked into Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, religion was a very nice segmentation scheme invented by.
It was a segmentation scheme, especially in India, but also in the West. And although there's a notion, which you find in all religions, all theistic religions, the notion of choice, of free will, as we say in Christian theology. And I just wrote an essay for a Dutch theological journal, making the case that free will is consistent with free markets.
I would love to read that. I haven't seen that. The research.
It's on my website, DeirdreMcCloskey.org.
I looked that up. So I want to finish up with, you have another piece that talked about sort of liberty versus freedom. And you touched on this before.
Yeah.
I want to finish up with that. I mean, we hear these words in the sort of political, sort of conversations, liberty and freedom.
Yeah.
But they are sort of different, aren't they?
Well, they are in modern English. They aren't in older English. The word freedom is a Germanic word. In German, it's Freiheit. It's the same word, freedom. And it meant not being a slave, not being a serf, not being subordinated to someone. The identical idea in Latin is liber, namely freedom. I mean, free to be a free person. And that's what it meant in Rome. And then we get the word through French and English of liberty. So up until, I don't know, the 18th century, they meant really the 19th century. In English, they meant very much the same thing. They overlapped. But since the so-called new liberals of the 1880s in England, in Britain, the word freedom started to get bigger. And it started to get confused with having resources. So it's rather obvious that a person who has $1 million can do more things than a person who has $100, right? That's so okay. A person who has wings, as against people who don't have wings, can fly, right? A person who has more abilities can do better than a person who doesn't. And people started to, especially in this matter of income, started to call that freedom. Now, I'm acquainted with the great economist Amartya Sen. In fact, there's a funny episode where Amartya and I and a couple of South Asian women went out with Amartya for lunch at in New York at the meeting of the American Economic Association, and all the women, including me, had on saris. At that point, I had one sari. Now I have two. Most Indian women have, 50 saris, but I have 2 at least. And the sari is the greatest article of clothing for a woman. It's like Italian suits for men. An Italian suit, any man looks great. In a sari, any woman. Anyway, Amartya has got it wrong. Dramatically wrong. He's got a book that you're familiar with called Development as Freedom. And he and my friend, another much closer friend of mine, Martha Nussbaum, talk about capabilities. They say, look, people have to get elementary education and they have to be able to eat. I mean, suppose you're not a slave, but you're starving. What's so great about that? That's their line of argument. They've got to have the vote, they've got to have this, they've got to have that. Look, the word in English, liberty, has kept its original meaning of its political meaning, that you're not a slave. Whereas this word freedom has just gotten completely out of hand. I believe, as Amartya does too, I'm sure, that, or he doesn't as much as I do, that liberty leads to enrichment. But liberty is not the same thing as enrichment. If that's the way you were using the words, it would be scientifically pointless, because you define freedom to be enrichment, therefore you say development causes freedom. But you're saying enrichment causes enrichment. See what I mean? It makes the theory into a tautology. So it's I prefer, and I keep correcting my own prose, to use the word that has kept its old meaning. I know it sounds complicated and academic and so on, but the problem is it has practical political consequences in policy, because it confuses. What people need is permission. They need equality of permission. That's what they need. And then you can leave them alone, help them out in a hurricane or something, but it's, help them out and help. As I said, I'm a Christian liberal. I believe we have an obligation to the poor. I believe we have an obligation of stewardship to nature. I believe we've got to be nice to people and reasonable, but I don't believe we should be bossing them around.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of thoughts that one could think about this. So in this politically charged regime that we are in today, in the US, I'm specifically thinking about, all these words are thrown out without really understanding what they mean in the press, on TV, and everywhere.
That's
and
right.
So the value of education, value of language education, I would argue, is increasing. And ironically, the value of technical education may be declining because we're going to have machines do most of that stuff. I don't know.
That's a very wise point. I think you're right. As Das says, and he didn't know Sanskrit very well. He was in business, and he got well-to-do, and he decided to retire from business and work on his Sanskrit, just the way I, as an adult, learned Latin. And that's a good thing, and it makes you wiser about words, just as you say. So you stop taking words as things. You stop saying, oh, well, if I say it enough, I'm free. I worked, especially in the 1980s, on rhetoric, so-called, the ancient Greek and Roman art of persuasion. And not that I got more persuasive, I'm not sure I did, but I learned about that words matter. And then I finally realized that they matter even in the economy. and I just wrote a book that came out in the spring called Humanomics, which is about this matter of words mattering in the economy.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been great, Deirdre. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
I enjoyed it too.
Yeah, good luck with all your travels. You seem to be doing all sorts of things.
Well, I try to keep I try to keep active. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.